How you doing there? Welcome back to Babylon Talmud. Today we're studying Daf Yud Tes, Daf 19 of Masechta Makos. Friends, we got some cousins over here. My uncle's gone, but now my cousins are here, but hopefully they won't be here for very long, and we'll be able to focus. So today's Daf Yud Tes. I think today might be a long one because I kind of want to get up to the Mishnah on Daf Chof Mud Aleph, so I think it might take some time. So we'll see. I actually have a coffee over here. Here we go. Let's do it. Okay, we're going to start all the way at the bottom of Yud Ches Amud Beis. Amar Rove bar Rav Ada Amar Reb Yitzchok. So Rav Ada bar Reb Yitzchok. Bikurim me'emosei chayovin o lein, says Rashi, misa zar ha'oichlon. So bikurim, of course, we said are called trumas yodecho, like truma, and therefore, if a zar eats bikurim, he's chayv misa b'dei shamayim, as if he ate truma. I thought these people were leaving. They keep on saying bye. It's like, all right, see ya, and then okay, have a great Shabbos, but like they're still here. But anyways, I imagine they'll probably be out within the next few minutes. I certainly hope so. Anyways, bikurim. So at what point do they become bikurim that are chumas yadecho, that zara ochlan would be chayiv misa b'dei shamayim, and also if they're warned for makos, that they can get makos mishayir pnei aboyis once the bikurim are brought into the Beis Hamikdash. So meaning, I think so, right? Wait, let me just double check. But boyis means like the Beis Hamikdash, right? I have to imagine. Let's see. The face of the temple. Yeah. So be'etzem, so at that point, if a zar eats them, he's chayev misa b'dei shamayim. If he's warned, then makos. So that means that, when you see the fruits and you kind of be like, okay, you set them aside for bikurim, they aren't yet Asur to a zar until they're brought into the Beis Hamikdash. Kiman, who's this like? Like the following Tana that we learned in Rabbi Eliezer, Mr. Rabbi Eliezer, Bikurim miktasun bachutz miktasun bifnim. If you have part of the bikurim outside of the Beis Hamikdash and part of some of them inside, maybe you have an olive outside of the Beis Hamikdash and you have a fig inside the Beis Hamikdash. Shebachutz harein kechulin. The fruits that are outside of the Beis Hamikdash are considered chulin, the whole devreim, for all intents and purposes. Shebifnim harein kehektish the whole devreim, and those fruits that are inside. Oh, I see movement, so they must be moving towards the gate, which is great. There's one person, a second person. Let's go. I think I need more people. This is a family with I don't even know how many kids they have. More than 10. Maybe 11, 12. So usually they don't come just one of them. Usually they send out a few of them, the whole team. Anyways. Okay. And those who are inside, so the fruits that are inside already considered like hektish, but they'd be considered bikurim at that point if they're inside the Beis Hamikdash. Coffee break. Here we go. Omer Rav Sheshes. Says Rav Sheshes. Bikurim anocha me'akeves boin kriya ein ma'akeves boin. Says Rav Sheshes that when it comes to bikurim, hanocha, right? We discussed this yesterday already. Hanocha, putting them down by the mizbeach, that is me'akev, that must be done. Kriya ein ma'akeves boin, but mikru bikurim, reading Arami Ovid Avi, is something that if it's not done, the kohen can still eat it. Kiman, who is that like? Ki hai tanat, like the following tanat, the tanat that we learned in the Brayso. Rabbi Yossi Omer says Rabbi Yossi shloisha devarim mishum. Sorry, the tanat Rabbi Yossi Omer shloisha devarim mishum shloisha zakenim. Rabbi Yossi says 3 things in the name of 3 elders. Rabbi Shmuel Omer. One of them is that Rabbi Shmuel says Yochel yaile adam meiser sheni bizman hazeh birushalayim v'yoichalenu. Could it be that nowadays in 2025, a person would separate Meiser Sheni from his crop and bring it to Yerushalayim and eat it in Yerushalayim. Vidinu Bechor Ta'un Havoas Mokim Umeiser Sheni Ta'un Havoas Mokim. Well, let's figure it out. What's another thing that needs to be brought to Yerushalayim and eaten in Yerushalayim? A Bechor. No, who's here? Oh, one goes, the other one comes. Anyways, all right. But there's more. Well, how many people just came? Wow, it doesn't stop. I told you yesterday, I have 3 episodes to record today. And it's going to be, I already recorded one with a lot of fanfare, and now is the second one. But, okay, anyways. So Bechor is something that needs to be, the firstborn animal, you give it to the Kohen, and he offers it as a korban in Yerushalayim. Now, so Bechor needs to be brought to Yerushalayim, and also Meiser Sheni Ta'un Havoas Mokim, and Meiser Sheni also needs to be brought to Yerushalayim. And Bechor Eino Ele Bifnei Haboyis, just like Bechor is only when there is a base Hamikdash. Af Meiser Eino Ele Bifnei Haboyis, so Meiser Sheni also would only be when there's a base Hamikdash. Nowadays, we would not go to Yerushalayim and eat Meiser Sheni in Yerushalayim. Very interesting. Very interesting to think that nowadays it's not. I mean, let's say you go to your field, right? Let's say you go outside. If you live in Eretz Yisrael, you go outside to your crops, then you separate the trumis and the meisers, and you separate meiser sheni. You say, "Oh, let me go bring it to Yerushalayim, and I'll eat it there." It sounds like no, we don't do that. So Ma'ala Bechor shekein ton ma'in domim ve'imurin legab mizbeach. But then we say, wait a second, but we can't necessarily learn Meiser Sheni from Bechor, because Bechor is stringent in that it has like an extra layer to it, which is that the blood needs to be placed on, and as well as the imurin, the specified parts of the Bechor, go on the Mizbeach. That is not something that is necessary for Meiser Sheni. So Bikurim Yuchichu. Okay, so fine. If we don't want to learn it out from Bechor because it's different, so let's learn it out from Bikurim. But Ma'ala Bikurim shekein tu'unin hanocha. But we can't learn out Meiser Sheni from Bikurim either, because Bikurim needs hanocha. Bikurim needs to be placed next to the Mizbech, and that's what makes Bikurim unique, and therefore Meiser Sheni can't be learned out from Bikurim. Now, if you'll notice, we said Bikurim is unique because it has to be placed next to the Mizbech. We did not say that Bikurim is unique because it has Hanacha and Kriya, only Hanacha, implying that what's Me'akiv is Hanacha, Kriya is not Me'akiv. Okay, so Talmud Omar, so therefore because we tried to learn out Meiser Sheni from Bechor and we failed. We tried to learn out Meiser Sheni from Bikurim and we failed. 1 second. Okay, fine. Right, so just to back up a second, so meaning we wanted to learn out Meiser Sheni from Bikurim because Bikurim is also something that had to be in Yerushalayim and that we don't do anymore. Right, so if we wanted to learn Meiser Sheni from there, but we said that Bikurim is unique because of the requirement of Hanocha. So we failed to learn out Meiser Sheni from Bechor. We failed to learn out Meiser Sheni from Bikurim. You know what? Let's just learn it out from the Psukim. Talmud Omer ve'achalto lifnei Hashem Elokecha v'goymer. What does the pasuk say? Ve'achalto lifnei Hashem Elokecha b'makom asher yivcha l'shakin shmo sham Meiser. So it's Meiser Sheni. Digon chator shechozecha u'v'choros b'korach v'sonecha, etc. Makish Meiser leBechor. So the pasuk is juxtaposing Meiser Sheni to Bechor, and now once we have this juxtaposition, now we can apply Ma Bechor Eino Ela Lifnei Aboyis Af Meiser Eino Ela Lifnei Aboyis. Just like Bechor would only be eaten when there's a Beis HaMikdash. Who else is coming? It doesn't stop. Anyways, just like the Bechor it would only be eaten when there's a Beis HaMikdash, so also Meiser Sheni would only be when there's a Beis HaMikdash. Nowadays, we would not eat Meiser Sheni in Yerushalayim. Now, back to our question, Ve'im Isa. Now, if Kriya was also Ma'akev, well then, when we were expressing the uniqueness of Bikurim, we should have said not just that Hanocha is Ma'akev, but Lifroch Ma'ale Bikurim Shkein Tu'un Kriya Ve'Hanocha. That Bikurim is unique because not only does it require Hanocha, well, whatever, it's unique because it requires both Hanocha and Kriya, which are not requirements by Ma'aser Sheni. So this implies that only Hanocha is Ma'akev, Kriya is not Ma'akev. So therefore, going back to earlier, the statement of, I'm backing up to 6 lines into the daf, Amr of Shesh's Bikurim Hanocha Ma'akeves Ben, Kriya Ma'akeves Ben, so Kiman, Kiyai Tana. Who's it like? It's like the Tana of this Brisa, I guess Rabbi Yishmael, who says that by Bikurim, Hanocha is Ma'akev, Kriya is not Me'akev. Amr of Ashi, but says Rav Ashi, maybe not. Maybe the author of this brisa could, in fact, hold that kriya, when relevant, is actually me'akev. Rashi says that this Tana could hold that kriya is, in fact, me'akev, even though he didn't mention it. How come? Nihidi ikuva leka mitzvah mi leka. Because Rav Ashi points out that even if you say that kriya mikra bikurim is not me'akev, it's not, if you don't do it, it's not, your bikurim is not possible, but clear, the Torah says, etc. Mikra bikurim is clearly part of the bikurim process. Clearly, you should be doing it. If you didn't do it, that's what we're talking about, b'di'evet. But of course, milchatchila, it's part of bikurim. So therefore, meaning, it's weird to begin with, meaning, even if mikra bikurim is not ma'akev, you still should do it, and therefore, it's weird that it is not listed. That mikra bikurim is not listed as one of the factors of bikurim. Right? We said that bikurim is unique because there's hanacha. Regardless of what you hold when it comes to whether or not mikra bikurim is ma'akev or not, it should be on that list. It's still part of the mitzvah of bikurim. Even if it's not ma'akev, like it's weird that it's not on that list, which therefore begs the question of why isn't it on that list? It's not just because it's not me'akev. Nidikuva leka mitzvah mi leka. It's not me'akev, but it is still a mitzvah. So v'lema mitzvah v'lifroch, right? And therefore it should be included in the question, right? Meaning it should say ma'ale b'kurim shekein to'un kriya ve'anocha. But why is it not? Why is it not on the list? Allah Amar Rav Ashi says, Rav Ashi, what's the base? Okay. Kevon, deika b'chorei ager, deboy lememer, bikure ager, deboy lememer, asher nishba Hashem lavaseinu, v'lo motzi omar lo psikale. But because if a proselyte, when a proselyte brings bikurim, he doesn't do mikra bikurim because he says Ashenish b'Hashem lavosenu, what God swore to our fathers, and God didn't swear it to his fathers. So a ger does not say mikra bikurim, and therefore, since mikra bikurim is not something that everybody does, a ger doesn't do mikra bikurim, and that's just fine. He's not supposed to do mikra bikurim. So therefore, it was left out of the differences. So when we say mali bikurim shekein To'on anocha, we leave out kriya because it doesn't apply to everybody. But you can argue that for those who it does apply to, you better bet your bottom dollar that it's ma'akev. So, okay, fine. Okay, so therefore, we wanted to say that that the author of this brisa supports Rav Sheshes, but then we say maybe so, maybe not. Okay, now. Fine. We want to argue that the author of the brisa actually holds that the kriya is ma'akev, or at least certainly can. Now, where am I? Where am I? Okay. V'lahadu dino v'tesiv ma'atzad. Now, frek the Gemara. We initially wanted to learn about Ma'aser Sheni from Bichor. We said no, you can't. We then said, okay, well, let's learn it out from Bikurim. We said, no, you can't. We then immediately aborted that angle. We immediately aborted trying to find another place to learn it out from, like not Bechor, not Bikurim. And we say, you know what? We can learn it from a puzzle. But why didn't it explore the Tzad HaShaveh? Oh, great, they left. That's nice. Okay. Yes. All right. Hopefully that will lead to quiet for the next 40 minutes or so. And so, where were we? Oh no, this isn't quieter. Wow. Okay. Anyways, so now I would have thought I lost my train of thought, but basically, initially we tried to learn it from Bechor, we said no. Then we tried to learn it from Bikurim, we said no. Now, normally, right, a common next step would be like, well, then why don't we look at the shared angle between Bechor and Bikurim? Often we would say, okay, why? Well, if we can't learn it out directly from Bechor and we can't learn it out directly from Bikurim, well, both of them, though, are things that apply in Jerusalem and that you don't do anymore. So therefore, let's say that Ma'aser Sheni is also something that you do in Jerusalem and doesn't apply anymore. But no, we immediately just aborted and went to a pasuk. Why? All right, again, v'lahadar dina v'tesi b'ma'atzad. Why was the next step not to look at the common denominator between Bikurim and Bechor and use that as an angle for learning about Ma'aser Sheni? Mishum de'ikal mifrach, because you can ask about that tzad hashove. Malat tzad hashove sheboin sheken yesh boin tzad mizbech. That both Bechor, which is a korban, and Bikurim, which are placed next to the mizbech, they both have an aspect of the mizbeach. Okay, and therefore we couldn't learn it out from the tzad hashove, and therefore it was learned out from Sukkim. Okay, this next few lines are a little bit tricky to read, so hopefully I remember how to read them. If not, I'll have to look at Rashi. Rashi explains how to read them. My ka sover, right? So we initially tried to learn out Ma'aser Sheni from Bechor, but we want to know what exactly is the opinion of the Gemara with regard to Kiddusha Rishona Kidsha L'Shaita. What about Kidsha L'Asid Lavu? Right? This is a concept that we've seen in the past, that when Joshua brought the Yidden into Eretz Yisrael and made the land right holy with for example, Bikurim, Ma'aser Sheni, the Beis HaMikdash, bringing Korbanos, was that eternal or was that for the time being? Right? So Makos over Ikas over Kedusha Rishono, if we say that the initial Kedusha that rested upon the holy temple in Jerusalem, Kidsha L'Shaita v'Kidsha L'Asulavu, is eternal. Who's here? Why are people here? I thought they were leaving. They're playing games with me. Yeah, I thought they were leaving. They told me they were leaving. They're playing games with me. Anyways, so if you say that Kedusha Rishona Kidsha L'Shaita v'Kidsha L'Asulavu, if you say that the initial holiness is eternal, which means that even when there's no Beis HaMikdash, well then there's holiness of the Beis HaMikdash. Afilu Bechor Nami, well then the Bechor nowadays should be offered, and should be eaten in Jerusalem. Ikasaver Kedusha, and we said not. But if it's Kedusha, right? If it's eternal, then it should be offered in Jerusalem. Ikasaver Kedusha Rishona Kidsha L'Shaita V'Loy Kidsha L'Asulavu. If you say that the initial Kedusha is not eternal, i.e., there's no Kedusha anymore, well then Afilu Bechor Nami. Yeah, this is where I get a little confused. I'm going to read Rashi. V'ikasaver Lokich Afilu Bechor Nami Tibai. V'ikasaver Kedusha Zabayis Botla Umibayale B'Maiser Hov'enu Tzarich Labayis Imis Achav Yerushalayim Ifnei Hashem Karina Bei Ilo Afilu Bechor Nami Ke'agam Tibayale Kigon Bechor Sheni Zoktamo V'Charev Abayis V'Adayim B'Sar Kaim Me Mau Sheyechalu. Okay, so right, yeah, it is a little bit confusing. I did need Rashi's help there, even though I've learned it a few times. So I'm going to read the last two lines again. If we say that Kedusha Rishona is temporary and it doesn't apply anymore, well then Afilu B'Chor Nami Tibai, the same question that we're asking about Ma'aser Sheni, we should then have for Bechor. Meaning, if Ma'aser Sheni is right, if the question that we have with Ma'aser Sheni, right, is Because I'm back in Rashi again. We're asking about Meiser. We're asking about Meiser Sheni. I'm reading Rashi, kind of like 20 lines from the bottom of Rashi. Since it doesn't need the Beis Hamikdash, right? Meiser Sheni, technically right now, on this very day, I could separate Meiser Sheni, go to Yerushalayim, and eat it in Yerushalayim. I don't need a Beis Hamikdash to do that. And we're wondering, Yerushalayim lifnei Hashem karina bei, right? That if we then eat it in Jerusalem, would that be considered lifnei Hashem? I.e., would we be properly eating Meiser Sheni? Well, if that's the case, that we're wondering about eating Meiser Sheni in Jerusalem, I should have the same question about Bechor. And as we're going to see in a minute, right, there was, for example, if you had a Bechor that was, slaughtered and had Zrikas Dam before the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed, and you didn't yet eat the meat, and then the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed, and now you have this meat that needs to be eaten in Yerushalayim. So in that case, so it's the same question. Like, why are we assuming that Bechor would not be in Yerushalayim? We would have the same question. If we say, right, that there isn't currently the Kedusha of the temple, we're curious about Meiser Sheni, should that be in Jerusalem? We should be curious about, should this meat of this Bechor also be in Jerusalem? We should have the same question. Why are we assuming no? So Ravina says, Ravina lo'olam k'sav Kedusha l'shaita v'lo, kiddush l'shaita v'lo kiddush l'sulavu. So says Ravina, look, really, we hold, that the author of the Brisa, the Tana, holds that the initial Kedusha of the Beis Hamikdash is not eternal, and there isn't currently Kedusha of the Beis Hamikdash. And here we're talking about B'Bechor shenizrak damai kodem churban habayis, that a korban Bechor that had Zrikas Adam before the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed, v'chariv habayis, and then the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed, v'adayin b'saro kayim, but we still have the meat. The meat was not yet consumed. Umakshinam b'saro l'damo, and we compare the basar to the dam, the meat to the blood. Rashi tells us the pasuk that says, "V'ez damam tizroik al mizbeach v'gomer u'v'saram yelach." That we compare the meat and the blood. Ma'damo b'mizbeach af v'sar b'mizbeach. That just like for the zrikas adam, you would need the mizbeach, so also just to eat the meat, you would also need the mizbeach. Umakshinan umakish meiser lebechor, and we then compare meiser to bechor. How come? Because the pasuk juxtaposes them, right? And Bechors. So, and therefore, just like the Bechor would not be in Jerusalem nowadays, so also Meiser Sheni would not. Okay? Givaldig. So that is how we learn that Meiser Sheni would not be in Yerushalayim nowadays, since it's juxtaposed in the pasuk to Bechor, and Bechor would not be in Yerushalayim nowadays, even if it's just the meat, and the Zrikas Adam was before Chorban Habayis, because the meat of a Bechor is compared to the blood of a Bechor, and the blood requires the Mizbech, so does eating the meat. But frek the Gemara, Chidavar Lomed Behekish, Chozer Melamed Behekish? But can something that itself was only learnt out through a hekish, not explicitly, but through a juxtaposition, then go and apply itself to a different halacha? So apparently we're going to learn in where? Masechta Chulin? No, Masechta Zvachim. That when it comes to Kodshim, something that is learnt out from a hekish cannot then be applied to another halacha, right? Cannot then be applied as hekesh elsewhere. So meaning, if the halacha about the eating the meat of a bechor was only learnt out through its it itself was learnt out through its juxtaposition to the blood, well then we, based on the principle that by kodshim we don't, right, something that's learnt out from a hekesh cannot then teach another hekesh, we would be unable to then use meat to teach the meat of a bechor to teach about Meiser Sheni based on its juxtaposition in a different pasuk. So Meiser Dogon Chulin Hu, to which the Gemara says, yes, but Meiser Sheni is Chulin, it isn't Kodshim, so therefore there isn't an issue of Davar Alamid Behekesh, Melamed Behekesh by Kodshim, because we consider the Meiser Sheni to be Well, that makes sense if you go based on the thing that is being learned out, i.e., since Meiser Sheni is chulin, therefore it is not a violation of this principle. But if you say Elulaman de Omar Basar Melamed Azlinan, that we determine this principle based on the teaching one, i.e., it is the meat of a Bechor that is teaching about Meiser Sheni. The meat of a Bechor is Kodesh. Michael, what do we say there? Uvasar Chada Dam Uvasar Chada Milsahi. The answer is that we don't view the blood of the mice of the Bechor and the meat of the Bechor to be two separate things. I.e., that the meat would be one right, that the meat is being learned up a hekesh and then applying to another thing as a hekesh. No, we would consider the meat and the blood as one thing, and therefore it's just one hekesh. It's not two hekeshes. Gewaltig. Okay, moving on. It says the Mishnah, Kodshe Kodshim Vechule, that, okay, we said if you Kodshe Kodshim outside of the Azar, but we also said that if you eat Meiser Sheni, or, what was the other thing that you mentioned in this Mishnah? I think it was two things. Let's see, what did it say? Okay, Kodshim Kalim and Meiser Sheni Chutz L'choma. Kodshim Kalim and Meiser Sheni outside of the base Hamikdash. No, outside of Yerushalayim. You would get Makos for that. Tanina Chadazimna. But we already learned one time. What did it say in the first Mishnah of the parak? Meiser Sheni ve'ektish lo niftu. That if you eat Meiser Sheni or Hektish that was not redeemed, meaning if you eat it outside of Yerushalayim and it wasn't redeemed, so you chayev Makos. So if we already learned out Meiser Sheni ve'ektish lo niftu, you chayev Makos for, so why is it teaching it again in our Mishnah that Kodshe Kalim and Meiser Sheni Chutz L'choma outside of Yerushalayim? We already know that from the first Mishnah. So Omer Yosi B'Chanino Seifa B'Meiser Sheni Tahor V'Gava Tahor. Our Mishnah is talking about where the Meiser Sheni is Tahor and the eater is, the consumer is also Tahor. So everything's Tahor, everything's gravy. But it's outside of Jerusalem, which is not gravy. That's not cool. And we're saying that he'd be chayav Makos for that. And he's pashut eating the Meiser Sheni outside of Jerusalem. That is not cool. Reisha, whereas the Reisha is talking about Meiser Sheni Tomei V'Gavra Tomei, it's talking about where the Meiser Sheni is Tomei, or the consumer is Tomei. V'ka'achilei b'Yerushalayim, and he's eating it in Yerushalayim, but it's Tomei. You're not allowed to eat Meiser Sheni that is either if the consumer is Tomei or if the Meiser Sheni is Tomei, it needs to be poded, right? So when the first Mishnah said Meiser Sheni ve'ektis shelo nifdu, it's not talking about outside of Jerusalem, it's talking about in Jerusalem. That it's talking about if the consumer or if the Meiser Sheni itself was Tomei and it was eaten without being redeemed, so then chayev Makos for that. Uminalon de mechayev ole mishum tuma. And how do we know that one is not allowed to consume Meiser Sheni when one is Tomei, or one is not allowed to consume Meiser Sheni that is Tomei, even though he's Tahor? The Tanya that we learn in a brayso, Reb Shimon Omer says, Reb Shimon lo bi'arti mimenu b'tomei. It says by vidui Meiser, it says that I did not consume it when I was bitamei. Ben she'ani tamei v'hu tahor, ben she'ani tahor v'hu tamei. Whether I am Tamei and the Meiser Sheni is Tahor, or whether it is Tahor and I am, whether I am Tahor and it is Tamei. I don't know what I said the first time, but I'll just translate again. Ben she'ani Tamei v'hu tahor, whether I am Tamei and the Meiser Sheni is Tahor, ben she'ani Tahor, whether I am Tahor v'hu tamei and the Meiser Sheni is Tamei. Either way, either way, when it comes to vidui Meiser, right? When at the end of 3 years, when you say I've separating all my trumas and meisus and everything, well, my meisus, I guess, and then so Yeah, so right, so he says lo bi'arti menu b'tamei, that I didn't consume it when I was tummy. So you see that you're not allowed to consume ma'aser sheni instead of tuma, whether you're tummy or it is tummy. Ve'echan muzer. Who's here now? Oh no, now my next door neighbor's here. They don't stop coming. You would think we're like the most popular location in the world. Anyways, so now ve'echan muzer al achila. Now, where is the warning against consume? Right, so meaning we just quoted that by vidui meiser, we say I didn't eat it when I didn't consume it when I was in a state of, I didn't consume it bitame, right? Whether it's tame or I'm tame. But now, where's the warning that says don't do it? We just said, okay, so you come and declare I didn't do it. Where is the warning not to do it? Ve'echan muzer al achila. Any yodea, I don't know. Tumas haguf behedjuksiv. Well, tumas haguf, right? Meaning if I'm tamei and the truma and the ma'aser sheni is tahor. Well, behedjuksiv, it says explicitly, nefesh asher tigabo v'toma adar. Somebody who touches, I believe, a sheretz will be tamei until the evening. V'lo yochal min hakodshim v'gomer. And don't eat from kodshim. It says kiyim rachaz b'sor b'mayim, unless you go to the mikveh, then you can eat kodshim. Now what's that talking about? Now you can't eat korbanos just immediately after you go to the mikveh. You become a teful yom, then you may possibly have chusar kippurim, right? So what's something that you can eat immediately after going to the mikveh? Meiser. So it's saying, right, v'lo yochal min hakodshim, don't eat meiser when you are tamei. Ela tumas atzmo minayin. How do I know that do not eat ma'aser sheni when the ma'aser sheni itself is tamei? The Chesiv Zapos says lo sucha lecho bisharecho. It says you can't eat in your gates, and that was talking about ma'aser sheni. Right, you have to eat in Yerushalayim. You can't eat bisharecho. Ulhalanu omer, and it says by a bechor that is a baal mum. So it says by a bechor that is a baal mum. Bisharecha tochalenu atome v'ator yachlev katsu v'cha'ayil. Right, that it says by a bechor that is tome, a bechor that is a balmum, that you can eat it in your wherever you live. A person who's tame, a person who's Torah, they can eat it together. It's no big deal. V'tani dvei Rabbi Yishmael says, afilu tame v'tor ochlim b'kaire. Achas. A Tomei person and a Torah person can even share from the same plate the meat of a Bechor that has a mum ve'ein choshishin, and it's all good. So we're saying that by a Bechor, it says that Tomei v'Torah yachtav, that you can right now. If you have a Tomei and a Torah person eating together, Memele, the Tummy person is going to touch the meat, and the meat's going to become tummy, and the Torah person is going to eat it, and we're saying that is no problem to eat this bechor that's a balmum, even though the bechor itself is tummy. But v'kam rachmana ha'eich tummy deshari lach hasam. Right, skip the words gabitar. Right, that tummy meat which I permitted for you over there. Right, because it says lo sucha lecha b'sharecha. Right, it says you can't eat b'sharecha, and we said that b'sharecha, we learned that from Bechor, is referring to even Tamei Bechor meat. And we're saying, Lo Sucha B'Sherech, you can't eat that. So Lo Seichel. Hacha Lo Seichel, do not eat that when it comes to Ma'aser Sheni. So we learn that whether the consumer is Tamei or whether the Ma'aser Sheni is Tamei, the Ma'aser Sheni cannot be eaten. I'm going to drink a shtickle more coffee. Weiter. Uminalon de bar pedia hu, and how do we know that? Right, because we said that the first Mishnah is talking about if you're in Yerushalayim and you have your Ma'aser Sheni, so that's when to eat it, right? Ma'aser Sheni in Yerushalayim, but it's tamei. So we say you can't eat Ma'aser Sheni, right? Tamei Ma'aser Sheni in Yerushalayim. You can't do that. So what do? You redeem it. How do we know that you can redeem? Because normally you can't redeem Ma'aser Sheni in Yerushalayim. Right? Normally once Ma'aser Sheni gets to Yerushalayim, you have to eat it there. You can't redeem it there. How do we know that if it's tamei though, you can redeem it even in Jerusalem? We know in the Bar Pediyahu, the Rabbalazar says, "Rabbalazar minayin the meiser sheni shenitma shepodin also afilu b'Yerushalayim." How do we know that meiser sheni that is tamei you can be poted even in Jerusalem? Normally you can't be poted meiser sheni once it's in Jerusalem. Then you have to eat it. But here, if it's tamei, you can be poted. Tamalomar kilo suchal seiso, because the pasuk says. When the pasuk talks about being poda meiser sheni, it says be poda the meiser sheni kilo suchal seiso. So normally, right, because then it's kilo suchal seiso ki yirchak mimcha derech. I think the pasuk says, right. That basically is generally understood as, look, it's too much to schlep, all your produce to Jerusalem. It's easier to just be poda onto money and bring the money there. So normally it's understood as kilo suchal seiso, you can't schlep it. However, ve'in seisa la achilo shnemar vayisa masos meis ponim. However, who's here now? However, se'es could also mean to eat, as it says by Joseph and his brothers. It says vayisa masos meis ponim, and there it's talking about the food. It's talking about the suda that they had at the end of Parshas Miketz. So when we talk about being poder, the meiser sheni, it says kilo suchal seiso, meaning even in a scenario where you can't eat it because it is tamei, so then you can be poder. Amar Bevai, says Bevai Amar Vasi, minayin the meiser sheni tahor shepodin oso afilu b'psia achas chutz lachoma. Bevai Amar Vasi says, how do we know that meiser sheni that's tahor? So we said that it can be you can be poted outside of Jerusalem. In Jerusalem you can't. Then you have to eat it in Jerusalem. But meiser sheni outside of Jerusalem you can be poted. How do we know you can be poted? Even if it's mamish just one step away, right? Also afilu b'psia achas chutz l'choma, even one step away from Jerusalem. So it's not far away, right? In the pasuk it says, right, kilo yuchal seiso ki yirchak mimcha amakom, because it's too far to schlep. Here it's not too far, you're mamish right outside. How do we know that you could still be poted even one step outside of Jerusalem? Shenemar kilo suchal seiso, it says you can't say so. So say so means to schlep. It also means to eat, as we said just a minute ago. When you can't eat it, you can be poted. But right, so it says kilo suchal seiso, you can't schlep it, even if it's just to schlep it from one step away inside Yerushalayim. If you can't schlep it, you can't schlep it, and therefore you can be poted even one step out of Jerusalem. But didn't we just say a few minutes ago that was needed to teach us, like Rabbalazar taught us, that even meiser sheni that's tamei in Jerusalem, you can be podek kilo suchal seiso because you can't eat it because it's tamei. So lo suchal leochlo. Well, if it was only to say they could be podek when you can't eat it, it should just say lo suchal leochlo. My seiso. Why does it say the word seiso? It's to say it's not just to eat it but also to schlep it. So why don't we just say that lo suchal seiso means that you can be poded because you can't schlep it, meaning even if it's right outside of Yerushalayim, but for whatever reason you can't schlep it in, you can be poded there as well. So why don't we say that that's what it's teaching? It's not teaching us about the when it's tamei. Then I might think, because I can't take it, I can't. Then the pasuk just say kilo suchal litlo, you can't schlep it. My say so tamil b'tarti. It uses the word say so to teach us both things, to teach us that truma, that meiser sheni that is Timea can be redeemed, it can be poded even in Jerusalem, and it's also teaching that when you have a meiser sheni outside of Jerusalem, but you can't schlep it in for some reason, that also can be poded. Yosef, Rav Chanina, Rav Oshaya were sitting. Now, I don't know, Hagos Abach suggests like moving around some words, skipping some words. Apischa di Yerushalayim, and they were sitting at the entrance to Jerusalem, and they asked. Okay, now I'm on the next line. Pshita hu bachul sumasoyoy bifnim. So obviously, if the guy is standing outside of Jerusalem and his meiser sheni, he's holding inside Jerusalem, kotu mechitzes. So the walls of Jerusalem will absorb the meiser sheni, and it would have to now be consumed in Jerusalem, and it cannot be redeemed anymore. The food itself is in Jerusalem. But what about hu bifnim umaso bachutz? What if he is inside of Jerusalem, but he's holding his meiser sheni outside of Jerusalem? Mao, what's the halacha? Is it considered like the meiser sheni is in Jerusalem or not? Tana lehu who Sava B'dvei Reb Shimon ben Yochai, certain elder by the I guess Besmedrish Reb Shimon ben Yochai taught Ki Yirchok Mimcha Hamokim, that when the pasuk says about being Podeh Meiser Sheni, it says Ki Yirchok Mimcha Hamokim, that it's far away from you. Mimilu Echo, meaning it's entire from the whole you. It's entirely far away from you. So meaning in a scenario where you're outside, but your Meiser Sheni is inside. No, fakir. If you're inside, but you're holding your Meiser Sheni outside, you entirely aren't far away because you're inside. So we say that would that makes it ineligible. Ineligible. I think that means not eligible for redemption, for being poded. By Rav Papa has a kasha though. Nakit le bekanya mai. But what if he's inside Yerushalayim, but he's holding on a stick, and the stick is outside of the walls of Yerushalayim? What do you think about that? Now, it's further distance from you. It's at the end of a stick. Teku. Ich weiß nicht. Chaver, I went the other day. I had the zchus to be in the north of Eretz Yisrael, and in Tzvas and the environs. I saw, the truth is, Ataka didn't go to the Arizal. How did I not go to the Arizal? I was in Tzfas. Well, that was an oversight. Wow. I fell asleep at the wheel. Huh. Totally spaced out on that one. However, we did go to Rav Meir Balanes. That's Rav Meir, from the Tana Rav Meir. Gewaldig. Went to Reb Shimon ben Yochai in Har Meron. Also gewaldig. And then we were having a barbecue in the forest over there, outside of Tzfas, and we discovered that we were right next to the cave, the Meire of Abaye and Rava. So we went to the kever of Abaye and Rava. It's there near Tzfas, a few minutes from Tzfas. And right next to Abaye and Rava is Rabbi Yehuda Nasiya, the grandson of Rabbi Yehuda Nasi. And a little bit far, just right past Abaye and Rava, is the cave, the Meira of Rav Papa Uvanov. So this was mamish. That was mamish Gval. There's so many kivri tzaddikim over there. Right down the road there is Amuka, Rabbi Yonasan ben Uziel, the top student of Hillel. Of course, I was also by Hillel as well, because Hillel is buried right next to Rashbi over there on Har Meron. So yeah, that was mamish a Gewalt. Okay. Where are we? Oh, so we just mentioned Rav Papa. Gewaltig. Let me drink a little more coffee now. Should I switch I'm going to keep going weiter, but I think maybe I'm going to switch the video now. So now, Omer Reb Asi, Omer Reb Yechanan. So Reb Asi, Reb Yechanan, Meiser Sheni me'emosai chayovin olav. So now when it comes to Meiser Sheni, at what point, I think the point is, at what point does it become Meiser Sheni? Yeah, and then at that point, you can't eat it. You see, I always imagined that you separated Truma, you separated Meiser, and then Meiser Sheni, immediately you can't eat it, right? But I don't know, it sounds like we're talking about Davka, I don't know, we're saying, at what point does it become Meiser Sheni? What is that? Does Rash? Oh, this is another thing, Cheveh. This is another thing. I didn't realize this, Cheveh. Listen to this. I didn't realize this, but the last, 4.5 daf of Masechta Makos don't have Rashi. They don't have Rashi. It's the Rivan, his grandson. Right? If you look at Rashi on that few Testament Beis, about 10 lines into Rashi, it says, Rabbeinu Gufo Tor V'yotze Nishmaso B'Tayre. Our Rebbe Rashi, his body is pure and his soul left in purity, right? Because the last Rashi that he wrote was Shirach Lenu Betuma, about Tuma and Tara by Meiser Sheni. Lo Peresh Yoser, he didn't explain more. Mikan ve'elach, from here on, Lashon Tamido Reb Yehuda Reb Nosson, the Rivan. his student, and I understand also his grandson. Chasano, I'm sorry, his son-in-law. His son-in-law. Rashi's son-in-law. Wow, a student and his son-in-law. Wow. I mean, we have Rashi on Masechta Shavuos, right? So what does it mean? Like Makos was the last Masechta he got to? We also kind of said the same thing about Bava Basra, right? In Chav Tes, there were like opinions that Khan Mace Rashi. But was he working on Makos and Bava Basra at the same time when he died? But why would these be the last Masechtas that he wrote about? Why, he's on Shavuos, he's on Avodah Zarah, he's on Zvachim, I think. I don't know. And so what does the Rivan say? He doesn't say anything. Okay, fine. So it sounds like so what are we saying? So once Meiser Sheni enters into Jerusalem, at that point you can no longer eat it outside of Jerusalem. Which is interesting. I mean, it sounds like when you separate Meiser Sheni, it sounds like technically you could still eat it until it gets to Jerusalem. I don't know. Interesting. And therefore, as the Rivan points out, that when our Mishnah says that if you eat Meiser Sheni outside of Yerushalayim, Chayiv Makos, so then it's talking about if you brought it into Yerushalayim and then took it out of Jerusalem and ate it, then you'd be Chayiv Makos. Does the article say anything here on this? Let's see. From Malchus. When is one Chayiv from Malchus? But maybe already from there you already can't eat it. You just wouldn't be chayiv. You just wouldn't be chayiv makos for it. I don't know. Okay. Also chayiv and olav mishara pnei achoma. Once it enters into Jerusalem. Okay, fine. My timer. How come? Because the Bible says lifnei Hashem alekecha toichalenu. Because it says that you have to eat Meiser Sheni, I believe, among other things. I think maybe Meiser Sheni. You have to davka eat in Jerusalem. And it says lo sucha lecho b'sharecha, and you can't eat it in your sharecha. Those are two consecutive psukim. All right, exactly. Lo sucha lecho b'sharecha meiser degancha v'tiroshcha v'tzarecha v'chos b'karcha v'tzanecha v'chonadecha asher tido avnei d'vasecha sumasedecha. Ki im lifnei Hashem l'kecha techalenu b'makom shivcha Hashem l'kecha by ato vincha v'techa v'avtecha v'masecha v'alev yishem b'sharecha, etc., etc., etc. So it says, right? So lifnei Hashem l'kecha techalenu, eat it in Jerusalem. Uchsiv lo sucha lecho b'sharecha, you can't eat it outside of Jerusalem. Kol echad dikarinan be lifnei Hashem l'kecha techalenu. Only once we read about it, eat it. Only once we can apply, eat it before God in Jerusalem, i.e. once the Meiser Sheni comes into Jerusalem, it's only at that point do we say that you cannot eat it outside of Jerusalem. But when we would not apply that you eat it before God, i.e. if it has not yet been brought into Jerusalem, lo karinan bei, lo sucha lecho b'sharecha. If it has not yet been brought into Jerusalem, then we don't apply lo suchal lechol b'sharecha, and you would not be chayiv. You would not be chayiv for eating it outside of Jerusalem. Interesting. Okay, meisvei. We have a contradiction. Rabbi Yossi says, Rabbi Yossi, koin she also biyadoi te'ena shel tevel. Omer te'ena zoi chumasa be'ukso meiser rishon betzvono meiser sheni ledroma vishnas meiser sheni v'Yerushalayim o meiser onivu begvulin ochlaloke achas. You hear this? Interesting thing. You have a coin, and the coin has a fig, and this fig is tevel. This fig is tevel, and of course he can't eat it because it is tevel. Now he's a coin, and he's holding this fig. He's holding it horizontally, okay? And he says that the bottom part, the ukitz, the tail of it, is truma. He's saying this part of the fig is truma. The north part of the fig is meiser rishon. The south part of the fig is meiser sheni, if it's year 1, 2, 4, or 5, and he's in Jerusalem. And if it's year 3 and 6 where it's Meiser Ani, then regardless of where it is, so he says the southern part is Meiser Ani. Okay, so again, you have this coin, he has a fig, and he's holding it horizontally, and he says the tail of it is Truma, the northern part is Meiser Rishon, the southern part is Meiser Sheni / Meiser Ani. Okay. And now we're saying if he eats it, he's chayev makis. Why is he chayev makis? Because he's eating tevel. Why is he eating tevel? Because, he's clearly planning. I mean, if he eats it, so if he ate it, so he's allowed to eat the truma, right? He set the part by the tail of it to be truma. He's allowed to eat truma. Now we're saying the Meiser Sheni, he's in Jerusalem, so he's allowed to eat that too. In terms of the Meiser Rishon, technically he can eat Meiser Rishon. The problem is that he didn't separate from the Meiser Rishon Trumas Meiser. Now, even though he's a Kohen and the Trumas Meiser goes to the Kohen, he still needs to separate it. He needs to designate it. He didn't designate any part of the fig for Trumas Meiser, therefore it's still Tevel, and he's eating Tevel, and therefore he gets Makis. If only it would have said, and 1/10 of the Meiser Rishon I'm also designating as Trumas Meiser, then that would have been fine. Then that would have been fine, because he's allowed to eat that. He's allowed to eat Truma. He's allowed to eat Meiser Sheni Yerushalayim. He's allowed to eat Meiser Rishon technically. He's allowed to eat Trumas Meiser. But he didn't separate, he didn't designate the Trumas Meiser, therefore it's still Tevel, and he's Chayev Makis. So again, coin shall also be other Tena shel Tevel. A coin has a fig. The fig is Tevel. Omer, he says, Tena, so this fig, Trumasa be'ukza, its tail, or I don't know what you call it, is Truma. Meiser Rishon b'tzvona, the northern part of the fig is Meiser Rishon. Meiser Sheni l'droma, and the southern part of the fig is Meiser Sheni. V'hi shnas Meiser Sheni, and it is year 1, 2, 4, or 5 where there is Meiser Sheni. V'hu b'Yerushalayim, and he's in Jerusalem, so he's allowed to eat that Meiser Sheni. Oh, Meiser Ani v'hu b'Gvulin, or it's Meiser Ani and he's anywhere in Eretz Yisrael. And technically, anybody can eat Meiser Ani. You don't have to be like a Kohen or a Levi or whatever. Achla loike achas. Now, if he eats his fig, he gets makis because it's still tevel. Vizar she'achla. Now, if a zar were to eat this fig, he would be chayiv 2 rounds of makis. 1 because it's tevel, and 2 because truma was designated, and he's not allowed to eat truma either. So zar she'achla loke shtaim. She'il betchila achla. Now, if the zar would have just eaten it without designating any parts as Truma or Meiser or Meiser Sheni or Meiser Ani, well, that Eneloka Ela Achas, he just would have been hit for having eaten Tevel. But because he specified Truma as well, so he would get Makis also for eating Truma. He wouldn't get Makis for eating Meiser Rishon or Meiser Sheni because, first of all, Meiser Sheni in Yerushalayim he can eat, and technically anybody can eat Meiser. He would get Truma. He would get Makis for eating Truma, and also since the fig is still Tevel, he would be chayiv for that as well. Okay. Now, time of Isay Yerushalayim. Now, the Brisa had pointed out that it's Meiser Sheni and he is in Jerusalem. Habigvulin. The implication being that if he was outside of Jerusalem, Loka Shalish, he would have gotten another round of Makis. So we see, even though he hadn't ever brought in this fig into, if he was outside of Jerusalem, so then he would have been chayav Makis also for eating the Meiser Sheni, even though he had never taken the fig to Jerusalem. So it sounds like you could be chayiv Makis for eating Meiser Sheni even if you haven't brought it to Jerusalem. So answers the Gemara, the Ayla va'apko. Well, you could say it's talking about that he did then take the fig, bring it into Jerusalem, and then left, and that's why if he was outside of Jerusalem, he would be chayiv makis, because it already did go into Jerusalem. But if that's the case, then what's the chiddush here in the Brisa? What, to say that you chayiv makis for Tevel, and for Meiser Sheni outside of Yerushalayim? Like, we know these things already. Like, what's the chiddush then? So, achav mayaskinon kigon de aylo betivlo. Well, I'll tell you what the chiddush is. The chiddush is that yes, he brought the fig into Jerusalem and then took it out of Jerusalem. The chiddush is that at the time that he brought the fig into Jerusalem, he hadn't yet designated which part was truma, which part was Meiser Rishon, which part was Meiser Sheni. He only did that after he left Jerusalem, which means that at the time that the fig was brought to Jerusalem, the Meiser Sheni was not yet designated. And still, later on, when he designates it and eats it, he's going to be chayiv for eating Meiser Sheni outside of Jerusalem. Now that is the chiddush, because matano shelo hurmu kimishu hurmu damyon, and that Rabbi Yossi holds that matonis that such as Meiser Sheni that have not yet been separated, it's as if they have been separated, and therefore this fig that he was just brought into Jerusalem stam and wasn't designated which part was truma and Meiser Sheni, etc. It's as though it was designated and set aside as truma as Meiser Sheni. Therefore, when he then subsequently left Jerusalem and ate it, he's going to be chayiv for eating it outside of Jerusalem. But is that really true that Rabbi Yossi holds? That matanos that were not yet separated are considered like they are, like they have been? We learn in the Mishnah Rabbi Shimon ben Yehuda over Mishum Rabbi Yossi. Rabbi Shimon ben Yehuda says in the name of Rabbi Yossi, Lo nechleku beis Shammai beis Hillel al peris shelo nigmar melachtan vav b'Yerushalayim sheyipode ma'aser sheni shaloim v'yochel b'chol mokim. That both Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel agree that if you have produce that is not yet chayav in maisris, right? Let's say it's not yet done with the process of harvesting and collecting and gathering and meruaching and right. It didn't yet get to the stage of processing that it would be chayav in trumas and maisris. And during this stage, this premature stage, it was brought to Jerusalem. So everyone agrees that if it then was taken out of Jerusalem and then subsequently trumas, maisris, Meiser Sheni was separated, you would still be able to be poda it and eat it wherever you want, right? Meaning, because once Meiser Sheni is brought into Jerusalem, it has to be eaten in Jerusalem. You can no longer be poda it. You can no longer be poda it. Now, right, you can no longer be poda it. But we're saying that in this case, right. So once Meiser Sheni was brought into Jerusalem, you can no longer be poda it. We're saying in this case, though, where this produce was brought into Jerusalem when it was still at a premature stage, and then taken out of Jerusalem, you can still be poda it, even though the grain was brought into Jerusalem, or the produce was brought into Jerusalem, but it was then taken out and it was in a premature stage, you could still be poda it subsequently. Where do Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel argue? Al perish shenigmira milachton, on fruits that are fully processed. Now, trumas and maisros haven't been separated yet, but they've been fully processed. They're still tevel, but they've been fully processed. They've been brought into Jerusalem. V'avri b'Yerushalayim, they pass into Jerusalem. Shebeis Shammai omim yachzer meiser sheni shaloim ve'yochal b'Yerushalayim. Beis Shammai says you have to eat the meiser sheni in Jerusalem. You can't eat it outside. You can't be poded outside of Jerusalem and eat it there. No. Once produce that has completed its processing has been brought into Jerusalem, even though the trumas and maisros haven't yet been separated, we treat it as though they have been separated, and therefore that meiser sheni that is ultimately separated must be eaten in Jerusalem. It can't be redeemed. Whereas Beis Hillel say yipode ve'yochal bechol makom, whereas Beis Hillel says that you can still redeem this meiser sheni and eat it wherever, which means that Beis Hillel's opinion is that we do not say that matano shelo hormu kimishu amudam. We don't say that we consider it as if the meiser sheni had already been separated, because we're saying that you can always be podet later on. And now we're saying this is the opinion of Beis Hillel. And Reb Yossi is teaching this, right? In this Mishnah, Reb Shimon ben Yehuda is saying the name of Reb Yossi, and Reb Yossi is saying that Beis Hillel's opinion. Now, of course, Beis Shammai b'mokum Beis Hillel enu Mishnah. Of course, we're going to hold like Beis Hillel, and so if Rabbi Yossi is quoting Beis Hillel, we can assume that Rabbi Yossi holds like whatever Beis Hillel says, and Beis Hillel is saying that this produce, when fully processed and comes into Jerusalem, and Trumas and Maasros have not yet been separated, we don't treat it as if they have been separated. And later on, outside of Jerusalem, you can always be poda it. But if it enters your mind that matanos that have not yet been separated are treated as if they have been separated, well, once the fully processed produce goes into Jerusalem, they should, right there, the walls have absorbed them, they should no longer be able to be redeemed. So Rabbi says, Rabbi mechitzes le'echol, deraisa mechitza leklot derabanan. To which Rabbi says, well, wait, there's a distinction between eating and then sort of being able to be podet. In terms of eating, mida oraisa, when Meiser Sheni comes into Jerusalem, it can now be eaten in Jerusalem. It can now be eaten. However, when this concept of once Meiser Sheni is in Jerusalem, it can no longer be redeemed. That is midirabon, right. And then when we say that now that when you leave Jerusalem, you can no longer redeem it, because once it's in Jerusalem, it can no longer be redeemed. So that is midirabanan, and therefore v'chigaz ki ise be'ene. And when the rabbis made their gezerah that once produce comes into Jerusalem, it can no longer be redeemed, even if you take it out of Jerusalem. That's only when you actually have the Meiser Sheni in your hands, that it's literally you brought Meiser Sheni into Jerusalem. Not potential Meiser Sheni, actual Meiser Sheni. So if you bring it outside of Jerusalem, you can no longer be poded. But lo gazer abanon. But when you're just bringing in a bunch of produce that hasn't yet been separated, and then you take it out. So even though Rabbi Yossi can say that when it comes to being able to eat it outside of Jerusalem, we would say that and you would not be able to eat it outside of Jerusalem without redeeming it first. But in terms of being able to redeem it, or really I guess maybe being unable to redeem it because it was already in Jerusalem, if it hasn't yet been separated, we would not treat it as if it's been separated, and you would be able to redeem it and then eat it outside of Jerusalem. Ravina explains, back to the question of, right, what was our initial question? Our initial question was that if we say that Meiser Sheni you're only chayiv for once it's been in Jerusalem, but we have this brisa with the fig where we're saying that davka you're not chayiv for eating Meiser Sheni because it's in Jerusalem. But if it was outside of Jerusalem, you would be chayiv, right? And we said that that's specifically where you brought it into Jerusalem and then took it out of Jerusalem. Then we said, what's the chiddush? So Ravina says, I'll tell you what the chiddush is. Kigon denoket le bekanya v'tivshot b'yad Papa. That's why I wanted to get all the way up to this next Mishnah, so we can get closure on the opinion of Rav Papa that we saw earlier, which is that, so what's the chiddush of this brisa that says that he's eating Meiser Sheni in Jerusalem? We're saying that it's talking about where he brought it in, that if it was outside of Jerusalem, he'd be chayiv because he brought it into Jerusalem and outside of Jerusalem. What we're saying is you'd be chayiv makos even if he brought it into Jerusalem and he was holding it outside of, he was like dangling it on a stick outside of Jerusalem. We would say that still he would be chayiv makos, and it answers the question of Rav Papa that he asked about what's the halacha when you're dangling outside with the stick. So we're saying that you would not be able to be podet in that case, and you would be you'd be chayiv makos for eating that, even if it's dangling on a stick. I mean, even if you were dangling on a stick when you came into Jerusalem, but you were holding it outside, if it was dangling on a stick, that would be considered like it came to Jerusalem, and you'd be chayiv makos if you eat it. Oh, more people came. This is probably an indication that I should probably wrap up. This was a long daf about Bikurim and Meiser Sheni, and peace out.